This is a map of the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, and these are Israeli settlements. But what exactly are settlements? Israeli settlements are civilian communities populated by Israeli citizens and established by Israel on lands it captured during the 1967 Six-Day War, specifically in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. More than 700,000 settlers, 10% of Israel's 7 million Jewish population, now live in 150 settlements and 128 outposts dotting the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Some house tens of thousands of Israelis and have city status, whilst others are not authorized and resemble shanty outposts. All, however, significantly impact the lives of Palestinians. During the early Zionist movement in the late 1800s to the start of the 20th century, as anti-Semitism rose in Europe, so did the immigration of Eastern European Jews to Palestine, causing the Jewish population in historic Palestine to increase from around 24,000 in 1882 to 600,000 in 1948. These Jewish communities mainly lived in newly established agricultural settlements and kibbutzim. After the 1947 UN partition plan, which divided historic Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, and the subsequent declaration of the State of Israel in 1948, the Arab-Israeli War broke out. In the period just before and during the war, 750,000 Palestinians were violently displaced from their homes in what was being called the Nakba. During the war, some Jewish settlements like the Kfar Etzion, which was originally founded in 1927 and located in the West Bank, were also attacked and depopulated by Arab armies. After Israel occupied the West Bank following the 1967 war, Kfar Etzion was the first settlement to be re-established by the Israeli government. Despite it being illegal under the Fourth Geneva Convention, it now houses 1,300 people. Kfar Etzion's re-establishment in 1967 marked the beginning of this new wave of settlements. A year after the 1967 war, there were 6 Israeli settlements built in the Syrian Golan Heights. By 1973, Israel had established 17 settlements in the West Bank and 7 in the Gaza Strip. By 1977, some 11,000 Israelis were living in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. Throughout the 70s and 80s, under successive Israeli governments, settlement construction accelerated. The government provided incentives such as subsidies for housing and infrastructure to encourage Israelis to move to these areas. By the time the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993, there were approximately 110,000 settlers in the West Bank in 128 settlements, and around 140,000 in East Jerusalem in 12 settlements. In 1993, the Oslo Accords agreement was signed between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The occupied West Bank was divided into areas A, B, and C, and Israel agreed to cease building new settlements in Palestinian territories. Despite this, settlement expansion continued. A year later, in 1994, the largest settlement, Modi'in Illit, was established in the occupied West Bank and accommodated 83,000 settlers, most of them ultra-Orthodox Jews. Modi'in Illit has its own mayor, schools, and medical centres, and in 2018, it was given city status despite the outcry from NGOs. Since the Oslo Accords, there have been enclaves built independently by Israeli settlers, known as outposts. Outposts are not authorised by the government and are often composed of mobile homes like caravans. Others are more developed and have paved roads and synagogues. Whilst Israel deems outposts illegal, Israeli authorities have played a major role in establishing them, and they are often protected by the Israeli army.
We have not decided on building new settlements, but we continue to allow the growth of the existing communities, and that was our policy and that will remain our policy.
We see the recent Israeli activities, settling activities, and the bypass roads. We see it as a severe violation of the agreement.
In 2012, 10 outposts were legalized by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Some of the largest outposts accommodate some 400 people. Between October 2023 and January 2024, settlers in the occupied West Bank built at least 15 outposts and 18 roads. Since Oslo, illegal Israeli settlements cover 42% of the West Bank, and 35% of the land in East Jerusalem is occupied by settlements and related infrastructure. But the settlements also require supporting infrastructure, roads that allow settlers to travel into Israel and from settlement to settlement, not to mention water and sanitation systems and power grids. So how is this all impacting Palestinian life? Israel's bypass road networks in the West Bank link settlements to one another and to Israel, while isolating Palestinian localities, blocking their development and severely restricting their residents' movements. Across the West Bank, 700 road obstacles, including 140 checkpoints, divert Palestinian traffic onto longer secondary routes to prioritize settler roads. Israel's separation barrier, which slices through the West Bank and not along the internationally recognized 1967 boundary, restricts the movement of more than 3 million Palestinians. Farmers, for instance, can only access their land near settlements twice a year, only with prior approval from Israeli authorities. Israel says these restrictions are necessary for security reasons, but human rights groups have described Israel's policies as apartheid. Israel has designated about 25% of the West Bank's territory as state land, meaning that the land is almost exclusively allocated for the development and expansion of Jewish settlements. Israeli authorities regularly evict Palestinians from their land and seize and demolish their properties to make way for settlers. According to Israel, Palestinian properties lack Israeli-issued building permits and land documents, but these permits are nearly impossible to acquire. Often authorities force Palestinians to destroy their own homes. In 2023, 4,000 Palestinians were displaced in the occupied West Bank due to policies and practices implemented by the Israeli authorities or Israeli settler violence. Hundreds of Palestinian structures, including homes, donor-funded schools, agricultural-related structures, and other buildings providing humanitarian aid, were either destroyed or seized by Israel. The official land seizures for settlement expansion and the takeover by settler groups have deprived Palestinians of their property and diminished the space needed to sustain their livelihoods. A lack of access to water sources used for irrigation, farming, and personal consumption severely impacts rural Palestinian communities, leaving them vulnerable and in need of humanitarian aid. In many reported incidents, untreated wastewater, human sewage, and animal waste from Israeli settlements floods Palestinian farmland, rendering it unusable. Since 1993, the settler population in the West Bank and East Jerusalem has grown from approximately 250,000 to nearly 700,000 in September 2023. This figure could reach 1 million by 2046.
I'll show you some pictures now from East Jerusalem, which you may find shocking.
As settlers increase, so do targeted attacks against Palestinians. More than a quarter of Palestinians were displaced in the West Bank and East Jerusalem due to frequent settler violence. This includes assault, damaging property, trees or crops, and raiding villages. The attacks often occur with the knowledge of Israeli soldiers, who protect the attackers and have increased over the years. The UN and other countries consider Israeli settlements illegal under international law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power from transferring its civilian population into the territory it occupies. The United Nations has condemned the settlements through numerous resolutions. In 2016, a UN Security Council resolution stated the settlements have no legal validity. Israel disputes this interpretation, citing historical, biblical, and security reasons. The US also frequently backs its ally Israel by using its veto power at the UN to protect Israel from diplomatic censure. Activists and legal specialists have argued that settlements are a major obstacle to the peace process, fragmenting the occupied West Bank and causing profound hardship in Palestinian life. Despite the international pressure on Israel to cease building settlements, Israel's far-right government, sometimes in association with nationalist groups, continues to back settlement expansion. Since the start of Israel's war on Gaza in October 2023, Israel's government has accelerated construction projects of settlements in East Jerusalem and issued the largest land grab since Oslo, providing the appropriation of 12.7 square kilometre of land in the Jordan Valley. As Israeli settlements grow and squeeze out Palestinian communities, culture and economy, any hope for a future Palestinian state continues to be stifled.